interacting with people that have very different cultural norms than you might have. You might not even be aware. And in fact, I pretty much guarantee at some point there are going to be times where you are really unaware of some of the taboo or some of the challenges around some topics that your client is experiencing, but you are completely oblivious to.
I don't know how to handle this. I'm not very good in this area. Whatever the issue for you as a coach might be, your clients have the wide range of issues too.
Money is taboo just in the American culture, I think. I believe I see it. If I have a lot of money and I say that, there's a lot of judgment that can get thrown in a certain direction. And if I say I don't have much money, there's a lot of judgment that gets thrown in that direction.
What does it look like at this stage in the cycle? Tell me what it looks like at that stage in the cycle. And we do a little sine wave on the board and said, like, you tell me.
What's up, Coaches Nation? This is Dr. Sherry with another episode of the Coach's Journey podcast, here with my amazing hatted Daniel Fernandez co-host today. Yeah, he's rocking the hat. Today, we are going to talk about the dangerous and forbidden topics in coaching. And really, this boils down to whatever topics your client has a lot of shame around. But we're going to focus on 3 that are very common, shameful or shame-ridden topics that a lot of times people really struggle talking about. And the reason this is important is because if your client is reticent to talking about some of these things because of cultural norms and such, you're probably a little bit hesitant, nervous, sweating a little bit, not really sure how to proceed in some of these conversations as well. So we're going to talk about how do you dive into some of these topics when they're hard to talk about, when your client is nervous and you might be nervous and everybody's nervous, and like, what does that look like? What is even the value of that? So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm super excited because,
And Sherry, it might not be just shame. It could be just embarrassment or awkwardness or social convention that's preventing people from really talking about this, or that's making you like worried about this topic. Like, is this
absolutely
taboo to talk about, right? So it's not all shame, but shame is a big part of it.
That's true. And especially as we are doing coaching across borders and interacting with people that have very different cultural norms than you might have, you might not even be aware. And in fact, I pretty much guarantee at some point there are going to be times where you are really unaware of some of the taboo or some of the challenges around some topics that your client is experiencing, but you are completely oblivious to. So it's just good to recognize that there may be topics that you're both a bit unsure how to handle, or that maybe one or the other of you is. So lots of complexity in this.
Yeah, I love that. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about today, because I think there's some different areas of taboo topics that people are hesitant to talk about. One is sexual topics. There's a lot of areas here that can be explored with clients, if you're willing to. And same with money and financial topics. And lastly, we might also have a chance to talk about addictive behaviors today. So I think those are 3 areas that we're going to talk about. And I'm really excited to talk with you, Sherry, too, because you have a therapy background also, in addition to the coaching that you do. So I'm really excited to hear about some of the addictive stuff with you at the end there.
Yeah. So sex. Let's talk about sex, baby. Let's talk.
Somebody had to sing the song. That's true.
I know, right?
That was actually, I want to go back to that song, because when that came out, that was like, oh my God, they said the word sex in a song. It's like, sex isn't wrong, bad, or evil. It's just that people get really uptight about it, right? There are very healthy versions of whatever sex that we're talking about is, and there are unhealthy versions. So we have to think about, like, you as a person, as a coach. So like, let me talk about this as from a coach's lens, right? Like, the problem for coaches is that we may have our own issues and our own challenges around a particular topic, like sex, right? It's like, oh, like I'm not comfortable with my own sexuality or with my own experiences, or I'm ashamed of my own past, or I don't know how to handle this. I'm not very good in this area. Whatever the issue for you as a coach might be, your clients have the wide range of issues too, that may or may not include the same ones as you. But back to Daniel's number 1 rule of coaching is it's not about you. When we let that stuff come to our mind and get in our way, we're making it about us. And the the pain that coaches feel is like, I don't know if I want to go there.
Yeah.
And the beauty of what you can do as a coach is you don't have to go there for you. You go there for them. You're willing to go there with them.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
part of it is bringing your experiences and learning to the coaching process, but they may have a different set of experiences in a different culture, in a different context that you know nothing about. And number one, I want to say it's okay that you know nothing about it from their perspective. It's also okay that you have your own things as long as you can get out of your own way by not letting those take up the time in your mind and space. You might hear those voices like, oh yeah, I don't know. That's okay. Just let that go and get back to listening to them. Right. Because you can always have them tell you the next phases of what they need to think about. Right. So like usually they have a lot of wisdom within themselves. And I also want to say, the other solution for you as a coach is to be willing to be open to that space, expanding to fit that topic too. So if a client is, like, let me give an example. My clients are open with me about just about everything in their life, most of them, especially after having been with me for a while. And, you know, at the beginning of a coaching engagement, the first couple sessions, they might not be ready to go there, and that's okay. But if it comes up in some way, you can make the indication that it is okay for you, that you're not going to shy away from that, you're not going to resist or hide from it. But anyways, after a while with them, usually they're in a more comfortable place. And what's happened with my clients a lot of times is they will bring something up. Last week, a client brought up their monthly cycle. It's a female client, and they have, you know, their monthly cycle, which is something that every female goes through. So for the guys out there, and not just the guys, but for the guys out there who are afraid to talk about periods, are afraid to talk about sexual health, are worried about this, maybe with your spouse, or maybe with your family, or maybe with your friends, or maybe with your clients, most importantly, with your clients, I want you to really think about where that comes from. Are you squeamish? Like, let me give you like an aside story to this. We had a nanny for our child, and the nanny saw a spider in her house, and she got freaked out by it, and she started being really afraid of the spider. And I was like, please don't do that in front of my child. You don't need to transmit your fears to my child right now. He's not afraid of spiders right now. And I hold spiders in my hand, and I say, oh, look, it's a spider. And the instant spider climbed up the water spout or whatever. So like, let's have a healthy relationship to this thing that you tend to be afraid of, but you don't have to project that onto my kids. Your job is to not make them afraid, right? And the same thing as a coach. You have your client in front of you. You don't want to tell them about your fears. It doesn't help them create a healthy relationship with sex in their life, right? They may have issues from their past. They may have challenges with their spouse around this area, but you don't bring your issues in. What you can do is bring perspective if you have good perspective to bring. What you can do is make the space so they feel heard and can figure out what to do next. You help them discover their answers, help them decide what they're going to do, and you don't have to agree with it. You don't have to project your values on top of it, although that can be a guide for questioning them. But if you give them good open-ended questions about that, you can help them figure out what they're going to do. So what the question we talked about with my client was what's happening at various points in their cycle. And so they're having challenges. They were in the part of their cycle where they're feeling very anxious. And they said, this happens, and this has come up before. So I said, like, you've mentioned this to me before. And like, when you're at the bottom of the cycle, you know, for you emotionally, you may be feeling very vulnerable or whatever, but like, let's talk about the reason you brought this up. We talked about a topic. We said, what does it look like at this stage in the cycle? And tell me what it looks like at that stage in the cycle. You know, and we drew a little sine wave on the board and said, like, you tell me. And so then they understood that A, I am not going to run away from this topic. B, this is just the facts. This is the facts of their situation. I'm going to approach it factually, not with any judgment, not with any like, ooh, squeamishness, or not with any like, oh, you got a cycle. Oh, you know, like there's no judgment. There's no shame. They can just be open with it. So they talked about this part of their life and what happens at the high points in their cycle and the low points in their cycle emotionally relative to this topic we're talking about. And I said, like, what would the ideal be? You know, what would you want to be? And because we noticed that the top of their cycle, they're still not doing very well in this area. So it just gets worse, and they notice it a lot more here. So we figured something out and said, like, what would you want this to look like? And so we said, let's start practicing that. So they figured out a plan for themselves and made some decisions and put some actions down that they wanted to take in the next couple of weeks. And then we're going to check in. And this is actually a good way for them to integrate how they're relating to what's happening in their cycle, because we talked about like what else happens at that time for you. And so what was good about that for me was that like I've gotten to a place in my life where I'm not worried to talk about this. Even with my wife, we talk about those things. I mean, I watched her give birth. I mean, I didn't just watch, I was holding her hand, I was with there, I was there fully there. I wasn't watching, but I was participating as best as I could as a person not giving birth. But like, this is an area I'm willing to go, and I'm totally not going to run away from it, because your client knows that you're not going to run away from anything. They might be able to be more open with whatever topic it is.
That was a lot of really, really great insights and great information, Daniel. Yeah. So for me, I would say, I mean, I've had almost 2 decades of a lot of really awkward conversations. So let this be a reminder that the more we do something, the easier it gets. So if you recognize that you've never had a conversation with somebody about sex, except for maybe your partner, and maybe that doesn't even happen that often. It's okay that you're feeling like a little bit nervous and you're a little bit sweaty and all of these things. It's okay, because this is a process of learning. A couple tips I would give you is, one is call it out, like call out the awkwardness and ask for permission. So it might be like, hey, you mentioned that there's some challenges between you and your spouse. And I think it might be really important for us to talk a little bit more about kind of how this is going for you guys. And there's some awkward questions, or questions that might feel awkward. Is it okay if we go there? Just kind of set the stage and be a little playful about it. Because if I found that if I can be a little playful about it, the other person's a little playful about it, and then it just feels less awkward. Like we can kind of go there. Um, So I mean, I've worked with dozens of couples over the years that have had sexual dysfunction. That I mean, in my experience, I would say at least eight out of 10 couples have a mismatch in sexual desire. It's usually the husband that is a lot more wants sex more often than the wife. On occasion, it's the wife that's in that position. But for example, if you're working with even just an individual, one person, and you're not working with a couple, and they're talking about the relationship, like these are some questions maybe to ask. Like, okay, well, can we ask what some of the biggest challenges are between you and your spouse, and what are the things you argue about the most? And they're like, well, if they kind of dance around, just get in there and ask the question, like, all right, who wants sex more? Is it mismatched? Are you guys equal? And there's just so many fun playful questions you can ask. But coming with it in that sort of attitude, I found has been very, very helpful. Another another challenge that comes up, and it came up for me, I remember, okay, so quite a few years ago, I had a client who, so there's two came to mind because I was thinking about stories. One story was a client I had for about a year, and she had a lot of personal challenges. And on top of that, her male partner wanted her to do and was asking, and they did some kind of, what, I don't know, kinky things. I won't get into details, but kinky things that she actually didn't feel comfortable doing, but she did it because he asked. And she had some self-esteem issues, and so I mean, it was in the context of a much bigger relational dynamic. And she would describe to me things that had happened, and inside I was like, oh, like I know I was having an internal reaction, because it was hard for me to just not like be repulsed at like what this guy wanted. um One of the things for me that was really important is I try to be non-reactive. And I don't mean like I just sit there like straight faced to everything, but especially when my client is saying something that I believe is probably pretty hard for them to say, is really sensitive for them, even if it's, especially something like this. Like, I am not going to be like, oh, like make these like faces. Like, I really work hard at being compassionate and non-reactive to kind of what I'm feeling on the inside. So that, I would say, that's a really huge self-awareness piece to have as a coach, so that your micro expressions, as much as you can control them, are not kind of affirming the client's own kind of awkwardness, or on the far end, their own shame about kind of what's going on. Um, I had another client too that I had the internal like reaction to, and he had a fetish around wearing diapers and defecating in them and sitting in that. And I'm just like again, internal reaction, but in the moment, like this is an issue that he did have shame around, and it was having an impact on his functionality in life. And so like my job right now is not to judge him. It's like we all have our issues. Sometimes they're just a little more extreme than others. So it's having compassion and not being reactive, in that moment to kind of my own internal, um, kind of dialogue that's going on. Like it's hard, and the more that we coach, the more that we have awareness and kind of can self manage at the same time that we're dealing with the other, we're being present with our client, and so there's just a lot of complexity in this space and talking about these kinds of issues.
Yeah. Wow, Shay, I like all the stuff you revealed. And it makes me think about the last story you made me think about is potty training. And if something went really badly traumatically in potty training, it's possible that that desire continued in adulthood, potentially, and got into a level that created this situation that you're describing. I'm not going to judge it because who am I to say what's good or bad for somebody else or what's healthy or unhealthy? But if it got brought up, it's probably because there's something that needs to be talked about.
Yeah.
And if you pass that judgment, it makes it a lot harder for that to be talked about.
Yeah. And I guess there is one thing that sometimes I wrestle with, in the psychology world as a psychologist, there is some clear right and wrong, right? Like this is a diagnosis. And if it's a diagnosis, that means it's not functional and it's something that should be extinguished. Behavior, emotions, feel it, whatever should be extinguished. In the coaching world, I find that it's a lot more fluid. A lot of coaches have the perspective that you can have your own belief and however you want. And I still honestly still tend to fall on the side of, okay, this is not functional, this is not healthy. The challenge though is still it's like how do I honor their perspective? How do I not add to shame? How do I bring compassion, understanding that they're in this place, they're doing these types of things or having these types of challenges, problems, issues. Pornography is a huge one that I've had a lot of conversations, mostly with male clients over the years. And I mean, I can't even imagine the challenge they have in opening up and talking about that, especially to a female. uh that takes a lot of trust and a lot of courage. And so as we have these conversations, that's also something that we can express, like, thank you so much for sharing this stuff with me and being willing to have this dialogue. I recognize it takes a lot of courage to open up about topics that you may have never told anybody else about, that you may not even be comfortable sharing with the most important person in your life, that you even have a problem or you even have a hard time admitting to yourself and acknowledging that. And then separating out the behavior is a problem, you're not a problem. I think that's really a big deal. I mean, there's, again, going back to, there are things that objectively I believe are wrong. Is one label. Less intense is unhealthy, unhelpful, not productive, not moving them towards their dreams or goals, however you want to label it. And so it's like, how can we have a conversation around these things that they're already ashamed about and help them move to a healthy perspective without heaping on more secrecy and shame and all of this stuff. Like it's a delicate dance in my experience.
I love that you brought this up because I want to talk about this a little more because you brought up pornography and I had a different client talk about their partner's use of it and how it made them uncomfortable and the conversations they might or may not be willing to have with them. And I
Yeah.
think bringing up the humanity of that person in front of you, Sherry, is so powerful as a coach. Like, hey, I understand this can be really hard to talk about. Like, I totally get it. And I want to be able to create the space that we can talk about it because it's really important to you, right?
Yeah.
And I think it would probably be even harder for the person who is struggling with it themselves. So like her partner if he had come and started talking about it, it would have been a lot harder for him too. So I really appreciate your point about that, Sherry. And I think the words we use to describe things like, hey, wrong is a very high intensity word.
It
And
is.
when there's shame involved, the words we use can actually matter to this
Mhm.
person. Even if you believe it's wrong, helping them come to their own conclusion of what is right and wrong for them
Yeah.
is important. Like, and you said the word functional, I like that word, but I also, the word I like to translate that to in coaching is sustainable. Like, is it sustainable and is it helping you get to where you want to go? Like, I think about intentional. Is this intentional? Is it sustainable? Is it actually beneficial? Is a word I like to use a lot. And that's like, I can always come, like, if I know their like vision of what they want in life, I can kind of see from my perspective and from their perspective, like, is this aligned with that? And if
Yeah.
it is, then that's different than if it isn't. Right. And so usually if I see something that's wrong, I'm not going to tell them it's wrong. I'm going to challenge them on that. Does this
Yeah.
align with their values? Does it align with their intentions? Is it beneficial? Is it sustainable? Will it help them achieve what they want? And that's the, to me, the coaching lens, the future oriented lens. I'm not
Yeah.
going to go back and say like, hey, what did your dad teach you as a child? Unless they bring that up. Like I just, I'm not qualified to go back and diagnose. I'm not qualified to go deal with childhood traumas, although sometimes that does come up, things from childhood. But I tend to go, where you at now? Is this help you towards your future? Um, and so like there's so many areas that people need to know that it's okay to talk about, and
Absolutely.
sex is just one of those areas.
Yeah.
So I really like your approach, Sherry, and you're thinking about the different levels of language we can use, and I think it varies with the client which language you want to use, because what's going to be beneficial for them in that moment, what's going to help them open up, what's going to help them make decisions, figure something out. And it's not for me to tell them like, hey, I don't agree with that. She was stalking me porn, and she's like, do you think that's wrong? I'm like, I don't want to give you my opinion. Let's have a conversation. Maybe later I'll give you my opinion, which I don't think I ever did for multiple sessions. And then she asked me, is there any research on this? I'm like, there is research. And I sent her a couple links because she asked me for that explicitly. And then we were able to more talk about that from like, what does she want in her life from her partner? And actually, in this particular situation, it was really interesting. She was able to effectuate change with her partner over time and change the behaviors for that partner through positive influence skills. So that's something you can do with your partner too, is how do you help change the situation for them in their relationship if there's an issue? And sex is a big part of that. So a lot of the time. So anyhow, but this is like, sex is just one area. We said we're going to talk about money.
Yes.
Maybe we should change and go towards a second topic here and talk about money, right? Kick it
Absolutely.
off, Sherry.
Yeah. So I think money can be hard to talk about again because our clients, maybe not even just our clients. There is this tab money is taboo just in the American culture, I think. I believe I see it. If I have a lot of money and I say that, there's a lot of judgment that can get thrown in a certain direction. And if I say I don't have much money, there's a lot of judgment that gets thrown in that direction. So they're just money is hard. I think about how I grew up and how money was or wasn't talked about. And I think about my kids and like how much do I talk with them about our finances as a family, because like I don't think that they're mature enough to like know like numbers. And I mean, so this topic is constantly going through my mind. And I've worked with clients that have had so little money and they've been absolutely ashamed about it. And I've really had to work hard to help them just go apply for food stamps, because they have so much shame and they don't want to admit to anybody that they need help. Because that often, I mean, that gets coupled that the fact that I have to ask for help for something means that I have failed, I'm less than, there's this whole mindset that can go with that. What's also interesting is now, as I do a lot of high performance coaching, I work with a lot of people that have a lot of money and there's still a lot of shame around money. Like as an example, entrepreneurs or will have come from a very high paying job that has given them a sense of pride and identity. And now they're jumping into entrepreneurship and they're excited. And then a year later, they feel very deflated because they're not making the income that they did and that they expected. And so they're not necessarily looking at it as this, 5 to 10 year journey of entrepreneurship. They're just feeling like they failed, they made the wrong decision, and they don't know what to do about it because if they tell their parents, or if they tell their siblings, or if they tell their best friend, or if they have a conversation with their spouse about how they feel deflated because their expectations of themselves and the finances that they can generate, they're not living up to their own expectations, they're experiencing a lot of shame. And then they tell the other person, and they're expecting, whether this happens or not, the other person to be like, see, I told you so. You should have never. Like, they're trying to avoid that conversation. So there really is an incredible amount of potential for shame, embarrassment, uncertainty in finances. And I know I've been in a position where I've asked people about money and just, in the context of what's stressing them out. And if it's not a stressor for me in the moment in my own personal life, sometimes I forget that this could be a sensitive topic and it could be a very taboo topic for them. And so there are some typical topics that I think if we approach with reverence and compassion, then maybe we can get proved wrong that it's not an issue for the other person to talk about it. Great. But if we go into it kind of assuming that there might be some challenges, I think that's a better position to be in, to start in, so that our clients can feel, can kind of feel the compassion and warmth that we want to set the stage and provide for them, no matter what the topic. It's just these topics are predictably challenging. Danielle, what are some of your experiences around money and clients?
I think I like the thing you said at the beginning too, which was, I have more money, I'm shamed. If I have less money, I'm shamed. It's not like anybody's going to say, like, I have exactly the amount of money. That would mean that nobody will judge me.
Yeah, you're right.
There's no amount that, no matter how much money you have, someone is going to judge you for not having enough, and someone's going to judge you for having too much. Which reminds me, the problem for a coach, the real problem for a coach when clients bring up money is actually sometimes not even about the clients, about the coach. This goes back to number one rule of coaching. It's not about you. Because when client brings up money, you're like, oh, will they renew? Will they sign up? What's going to happen to me? Like, shut those thoughts off. Okay. I want you to get back into service, right? Whether they sign up or whether they renew is a separate question. And right now you're here for the client. You're here in service, right? Yeah. Sure, you want them to sign up. As long as you're doing your outreach and doing your offers and making proposals and invitations to people to coach with you on a regular basis continually, people are going to sign up with you eventually. This one client in front of you, do not let that be the reason you get all weird and you get all icky and you get all, use the word salesy. I don't even like that word because sales is actually an important part of coaching. But you don't need to tighten up and worry about, oh, will they have enough money for coaching? Forget that. Try to put that out of your head and come back to what are they telling you? And what about their situations you need to pay attention to so that you can actually help? Because if you help them, maybe they'll sign up with you anyway. But that's not the point. So I just wanted to say there's triggers for the coaches here, right? There's triggers around like your own life and your own situation. And if you're not doing the work of a coach, which is making all the outreaches, asking for referrals, following up, making invitations, inviting people to coach with you, if you're not doing that, you're going to feel insecure about whether they sign up. So do the work, do your homework every single day, not just when you feel like it, and make sure you have a pipeline of people coming in so that you can feel okay within yourself. And then it's a lot easier for you to stay in that mind of service, right? And then when you're in that mind of service, you can have that compassion. So there's two sides of this, right? One is compassion, like it's okay, wherever you are, it's okay that your family's judging you. It's okay that people want your money. It's okay that you don't have enough. It's okay. Whatever it is right now is okay. Let's get that out of the way. And let's figure out what you want and how we can help you get there. Right. And part of the shame around money is that in the coaching frame, we release that. This is the one place they can go where they're not going to be judged, where they can be totally an open book and nothing's going to happen negative. In fact, something positive is probably going to happen. If they have that expectation about the coaching session, they're going to make more progress, right? Because they're going to be willing to open themselves up. And I think, Sherry, you said a really powerful point about, I don't want to ask for help. with money specifically, this is a big one, right? People don't want to ask for help for money, not only because of the shame, because we're taught you're supposed to do this on your own. You become an entrepreneur, and now you don't need anybody to help you because you're the entrepreneur. You're the glorified Shark Tank, whatever. There's a whole bunch of other social baggage around money. And so when you make that space possible for them, where they actually can be open, where they can actually solve the problem, and part of that solution is going to be asking for help. It's going to be being more open about money, learning how that feels, learning how to do it, allowing themselves to be a little vulnerable so they can actually make change. Like if I have a client who didn't share any of their finances with their wife, and their wife's spending all the money, and so it's like, well, maybe you need to talk to her. He's like, well, we can't have that conversation. And so we started talking about it. What conversations are you having, and how's that going? And we went deeper, and we realized what it is. It's this, it's not that, it's that, it's not this, that is causing the challenges. So let's talk about what conversations we should be having. And if it's a problem for you to pay the bills on time, it's okay that she pays the bills. But if you're talking about strategically handling the money, that's a conversation maybe she needs to be involved with. And here's how we can practice that conversation, or what are the things that we need to talk about, so that becomes easier. And it's not hard to talk about money because you don't think she's going to like the way you're making decisions, or you don't want to say no to her spending. Well, once you align, and that takes time, it'll take weeks and months for you to figure out a system to align on those things and the influence conversations you need to have. It could not be as spouses, it could be with friends. I always think about that Friends episode where, Rachel, I don't remember who it was Joey, who didn't want to pay the equal share of the dinner. And it was so, but that's such a good microcosm. It was so awkward for them to raise the point, like, hey, I ordered water and a small cookie so that I didn't have to pay $75 for my meal because I'm trying to save some money. But they didn't want to bring that up. That's just like a social commentary, right? It's like, oh, I don't want to have to tell people that I'm saving money. Well, that's what it is. That's the facts. Don't be ashamed about it. Figure out how to communicate about it, how to hold your boundaries. This is part of the whole money thing, right? So, I mean, and then if you can help your client figure out their money issues, they are going to be more likely to renew with you. I have a client right now who's on a hiatus, and one of the challenges they're having is a financial issue that came up in their life. So what I've told them is like, I'm happy to help you think through the financial issue because I know you want to coach again because they said they want to, but they have to deal with this financial issue first. And I'm like, let's hop on a couple calls. Let's talk about the financial issues so we can get you on a path so that you can come back to coaching. And they have already been open. We walked through all their expenses. They're like, oh, I've never seen my expenses out in front of me. I'm like, well, that's the power of coaching. Just like the time to think, the time to reflect, and the time to get perspective. And so making these, opportunities for them to be open, to not have to worry about judgment, to actually make progress on something that is really hard to talk about with other people, that is powerful and it's valuable. And if it helps them, then they might be more likely to sign up for coaching because they have more money too, because they're managing it better. So whatever the case is, like money can be a really huge detriment, but coaches need to get out of their own way and give their clients that space.
Absolutely. One thing that I was reminded of as you were talking, Daniel, is that, and I fall into this trap pretty easily, that money is tangible and it's solvable. And I can get really solution focused when I have conversations around money with clients. And I can easily forget to ask about their emotional experiences with money. How are you feeling right now as we're talking about your debt? Or how are you, what's coming up for you inside? How are you feeling on the inside? What is your body doing right now as you're sharing with me that you're not getting the amount of income that you expected and need after you've left your job? Really being able to help them dial into that emotional experience with money is something that they're probably not going to get anywhere else. And I think that's also the power of coaching, is that we do have the power, the permission typically to ask these super vulnerable questions about super vulnerable topics that they won't have talked with anybody else. I've had some conversations with people, with very successful people that were 100 million, like very, very high income, and they don't have a lot of people in their life that they can have a conversation with about a high level of money without that person, whether it's their perception or not, where they're perceiving the other person as being jealous, as, as being like those sorts of emotions happening. And so for your client to be able to believe that they can have a conversation about some of these topics without feeling like there is this judgment, comparison, this kind of negative cloud of emotions coming from the person that they're talking to can be so incredibly freeing. And for you to provide those powerful moments, that is what will keep them hooked on coaching, because you can have those conversations. It doesn't mean, I don't have the skill set to help somebody who's got, $100 million net worth. I don't have the skill set to help them double their net worth in the next 5 years, let's say, with their business. I've not been there, but that doesn't mean that I can't help. So, not making sure we're not confounding solving their money problems, if we feel like we've got money problems, with being able, the value of holding space and having conversations and helping them figure out their next steps and their best solutions, which is what we do in coaching anyway. So it's just the money thing just makes people weird.
Yeah. And Sherry, I think you're bringing up the pattern between the two topics we talked about, whether it's sex or money, is the coaching space should be a space of trust.
Yeah.
Even with people with a lot of money, everybody's trying to get their money in their perception a lot of the time. And as long as you are not that person, even if they're paying you as a coach, you can still not be the person who's trying to get at their money, right? Absolutely. It's not about getting their money. It's about actually creating the value for them.
Yeah.
And being that trusted advisor, partner, coach, whatever it is that you do. If you can be that trusted person in life where they know that you're not just going to try to get their money at their expense and your benefit, where it's a mutually beneficial relationship. I always say in coaching, and in every relationship in your life, think about this, it should be mutually beneficial. If it's good for that person and not good for me, that's not going to work. It used to work all the time for me. It didn't used to work, but I used to do that all the time. We'll make, sacrifice myself for the good of their other relationship. And it was not a healthy, sustainable relationship. It's true in coaching too. Both sides have to have a mutual benefit. And in coaching, you're offering them coaching value and they are giving you money, and that's fine. Yeah. But you can still build a very trusting relationship where you're not just trying to take their money. Think about that. If you see people as like income sources when they first start thinking about coaching with you, try to remove that thought from it. They might be a source of income. They might provide a source of income, but that person is not an income source. That person is a person. That person is a person in front of you, and you can actually do a lot of acknowledgement and relationship building with that person regardless. You can actually make a difference for somebody, whether they sign up for coaching or whether they don't, whether they renew, whether they don't. Be out to make a difference. And when somebody feels it's valuable enough, be open to receiving the money for the value that you provide. So I think the key pattern here is trust, creating that trusted space of you as someone who's here to help.
I love that. Should we dive into our third topic?
All right, we talked about sex. We talked about money. Let's talk about
sex for money. No, just kidding.
No. Let's not talk about that. We're talking about, although it could be relevant to the third topic, which is
addictions.
Just addictive behaviors, because not all addictive behaviors are equal to addictions necessarily, right?
That is true.
As a therapist, maybe you can clarify the difference.
Yeah, that is true. There is alcoholism and then there's alcohol abuse. Those are two very separate and distinct diagnoses, as an example.
Which may overlap, but may not, right?
Right. So addictive behaviors. I think this is a more challenging one in some respects, I think, as a coach, because I don't know what behaviors are going to be experienced as addictive for the client. Like, this could be anything, really anything. And an addiction, clinically speaking, an addiction is a behavior that we don't feel like we have a lot of control over, that is causing dysfunction. That is kind of the clinical term, dysfunction in our life, meaning it's interfering with our ability to live life the way we want. It's interfering with our ability to have the kinds of relationships we want, or the kinds of job, the kinds of finances, whatever it is. It's cutting something off at the knees. And again, like, it's sometimes these kinds of I create I become aware of addictive behaviors with clients, sometimes at completely random times. And sometimes it takes a bit for me to be like, oh, and some of them are like eating. This is really a challenging topic for a lot of women. And it's a challenging topic in my own life. Like what is healthy eating, and the struggle around the eating habits, and then the impact that it has on our health and our weight and all of these different things. This is a very touchy topic for a lot of people, particularly women, but of course it can be for men. It definitely is for often in the teenage world as well. It just so eating is kind of an example. Other obvious examples are things like gambling, alcohol use, sex, which is separate, can be separate from that first topic where we're like, sexual, like if you're in a marriage or a committed relationship and there's a difference of desire, that's one thing. But if you're talking about pure sexual addiction, I've worked with clients who have an addiction to one night stands. It's like the dopamine hit and all of the emotional, highs that come with that. I've also worked a lot with alcohol and drug use. I got to lead a program in the military when I was a psychologist around drug and alcohol use and kind of recovery. I've worked with a client who had bulimia, and she had it for so many years, and just it was a constant struggle. And she's thrown up so many times in her life that her esophageal lining was literally like going away. And her medical doctor has told her, I can't guarantee that the next time you throw up is not going to kill you. And that didn't even stop her. Like, there is just some really big challenges. And here's the thing, again, as coaches, we may be the lifeline for our clients to open up about some of these behaviors that they are so ashamed of that they don't tell anybody else. And in fact, they may be embarrassed to even admit to themselves. And if there's one thing that keeps addictions solidly in place, it's secrecy. Like, that is the thing that keeps these things going. And so your ability, your willingness to ask some really tough questions, and if for you it feels super uncomfortable, that's okay. Go with it, because it's probably even more uncomfortable for them. And if you're willing to sit in that discomfort yourself, that is potentially one of the most powerful moments that you can provide for your client in these kinds of challenges.
Yeah, this is a really really deep and difficult topic for so many people, and I've had I've seen addictions in both my social and family circles. And as a coach, I'm not a therapist, so I don't have the clinical background that you do, Sherry, and I don't
Yeah.
have the depth with which to handle these kinds of issues. Like, I think that's not somewhere that I want to go with my clients most of the time. Is like, how do we solve the addiction? That's actually not my goal typically with addictions or things
Right.
that appear to be addictions. Most of the time, I think the problem for coaches too is like we think we have to solve everything. You don't have to solve everything, right? The pain is like, oh, I'm here to help. Well, there's lots of different ways to help. Number
Yeah.
one, if somebody comes to me with an addiction, if I have some experience with this, I can offer some perspective. If I've seen it in my family, I can offer some stories and perspective, maybe. But at the end of the day, I know that I'm not as powerful as the addiction, right? I can't even stop my own addiction. So, for example, forget secrecy. I'm going to share right now. I have my own struggles with addictions around like things like scrolling. For example, you might think, oh, it's scrolling. It's not really an addiction, but it's an addictive behavior that I have. Let me not call it an addiction, because it's an addictive behavior that I have
Yeah.
exhibited. And when I get into a lower energy phase of my, like say I'm having a low energy week, I might fall into that. If it's like 10 o'clock at night, I'm getting ready to go to sleep, and I'll just like turn on the YouTube. And then suddenly I'm fighting 1,000 engineers and AI who have algorithmically designed this to hack my mind and my attention. And it's a
Yeah.
very self-fulfilling. And so it's very hard to get out of that spiral. And 3 a.m., you're like, what the heck am I doing? This is not helping my life. I've had that struggle. And I know that it's a struggle for me, but I have not 100% solved it. I've gotten a lot better. But one of the things that really helps, as you said, is not keeping it to yourself. Like, I just shared it with the world. Whoops. But I've also shared it with my wife.
Yeah.
And every now and then when she thinks I might be susceptible, she's like talking to me about like, do you need help right now? Or how can we, and so there's this like also resources that you can add into your life. So something I might do with clients is not say like, oh, you need to stop that. Here's how you can stop it. Watch this video. That's funny. No, it's like, what support are you going to get in your life? How could you take some steps to help? And honestly, most of the time, just talking about it with you in a session and then maybe talking about it again, knowing that it's a topic we are going to talk about, will give them some hope. It's not
Absolutely.
saying it's going to solve it. It'll help them take those steps, getting their spousal support, getting help from a professional therapist who deals with addictions, right? Getting into a group. There's lots of things you can do for clients to help encourage them to take the steps. You help them figure out what's going on, help them get a feel for what the facts of the situation are for themselves, what is going on, and then you help them decide that they're going to do something different. And that might not be that same session. They might not be ready to do something different yet. Maybe next session they will be. But when they do decide to do something different, help them figure out what the options are. What could you do different? And then if they're committing to helping themselves shift these addictive behaviors, now you can start telling stories of hope. Now you can start helping them, envision what it's going to be like if you get help from that person. Like, let's talk about what do you think is going to happen? How could they help you? And then how could you make sure that that's the way it goes by the conversation that you have with them? And so then you can actually say, hey, would you like to continue talking about this as you make progress here? Is this something you want to measure on a weekly basis, or however often you're meeting? Maybe if you have an intake for every session, you can add one thing I like to do with clients. Here's a little tip: is like we have our weekly intake. So before the session starts the night before or the morning off, they will fill it in, and so I'll get a feel for what's on their mind at least. So it saves some time on the updates. And we don't always talk about everything on there, but sometimes I'm like, this happened to me last week. I took a clarifier, call it a coaching client clarifier. And I said like, hey, this topic, this is something that's going to be important for us for probably a few months to talk about. And they're like, yeah, it is. I'm like, if there's one way to measure our progress in this, what would it be? And so we came up with a question together that we would want them to ask everyone. I said, hey, could I just put this in the clarifier? So every time you have a session, you're thinking about this question and measuring. And as we know from Peter Drucker, what gets measured gets managed, right? So if they're thinking about it, at least I'm helping them there. I'm not solving the problem for them. I'm helping them think about it. And this might be an addictive behavior. It might be a different kind of behavior. Whatever the case is, paying attention to it, not keeping a secret, creating a plan to ask for help, and then checking in, right? Over time and being consistent with that can be a really powerful strategy for a coach to use, but you're not a therapist and you can't solve the underlying causes necessarily.
Yeah. Yeah. And having a referral network is certainly important for this.
Yes.
And feeling like you have to take ownership over everything going on in a client's life is a recipe for burnout, regardless of if it's an addictive behavior or something else.
It's also not healthy for the client.
No, like you're not going to be the be all end all for your client. The expectation is that you're a significant help in whatever areas you guys have negotiated on, but for you to feel like I can't, maybe I can't help and support them in this one area, so therefore maybe I can't help them at all, like all or nothing thinking around this, or the thought that, well, I'm helping him in this, so now I have to help him in this. I feel like I have to be able to somehow figure this out or be an expert. Neither of those beliefs necessarily has to be true. You can continue on in the way that you were potentially, and bring in another resource, help them get support in another area if they need that extra level of support. It's just, you have the beautiful opportunity to ask them to uncover and to help them assess for themselves, how big of an issue is this, and help them remove that self-judgment so that they can reach out for the appropriate level of care that they need if that's what ends up needing to happen.
Love that, Sherry. Well, like, this has been an amazing conversation. I think we covered like 3 really deep, difficult topics for coaches, whether it's sex, money, or addictive behaviors. How do you go in there? Like, this has been an amazing podcast. I think I've learned some things from you, Sherry, today. So I just want to say thank you for the amazing conversation. I hope our listeners get a lot out of what we talked about today.
Absolutely. And thank you, Daniel, for jumping in there and sharing some of your own stories. It's powerful. It's powerful to be able to share stories about our clients and even ourselves. So that's the power of coaching.
All right. Well, join us next time on the Coach's Journey podcast, where we'll have in-depth and insightful conversations for coaches. And if you're actively building your coaching business right now, you need support. Join our community at cmc.coach, and we'll be happy to support you along the journey.
Sounds good. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.